So again, thank you for coming out. How many of you came here this morning to be converted? Show of hands. Okay, just a couple. See me after. That's actually a huge relief because I don't know what else you heard, but this shit doesn't work. Gay conversion therapy goes by many different names, including gay to straight therapy, reparative therapy, or my favorite, SOCI, which stands for Sexual Orientation Change Efforts. But whatever the name, it's generally defined as a wide array of pseudoscientific and quasi-religious procedures designed to make gay people straight. These efforts are always fruitless, of course, but they're not always ineffective. The effect generally includes shame, depression, and suicidal ideology. The truth is we don't know what causes sexual orientation yet. There's a good deal of evidence that it's biological. We may get there someday. But we do know also that you can't change your sexual orientation. People have been trying for a really long time, and there's a long and bloody history of this. So this talk is not about what causes sexual orientation. It's about the harm that gets created by people who try to make you change yours. This fact has not gone unnoticed by professional organizations. More than a dozen of them in the United States alone have taken the time to create policy statements against gay conversion therapy. And for good reason. One of those reasons is suicide. This generally happens to young people, although not entirely. And suicide is the second leading cause of death among youth in America. Gay and lesbian teens are 5 times as likely to commit suicide. Gay youth who come from rejecting families are 8.4 times as likely. And each act of harassment, shaming, abuse increases that likelihood by as much as 2.5%. These are the 2 books at the heart of this problem. I'm sure you recognize the one on the left. The one on the right could be called the Bible of Psychotherapy. It's known as the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This is the 5th edition. These books have a surprising amount in common. They've both existed in numerous forms over the years. They're both interpreted differently by various people, and they both have great potential to harm if we're not careful. The 2 groups I'm going to tell you about today are not the only gay conversion therapy groups, but these are the big boys. They include Exodus International, which is primarily a religious organization, and NARTH, the National Association for Research and Therapy of Homosexuality, which is not primarily religious, it's primarily psychologists and psychiatrists. Exodus International was founded in 1976 by a number of people, but primarily it was Michael Bussey and Gary Cooper. After Bussey called a suicide hotline to deal with his depression, it was a local church group, unfortunately. They called him in, and through a series of bizarre circumstances, he ended up working with this group to found Exodus International, which operated as a nonprofit, interdenominational, ex-gay Christian organization that set out to, quote, limit homosexual desires. Exodus is actually an umbrella organization for over 120 local ministries in the US and Canada and 150 ministries in 17 countries. They had been very successful, bringing in millions of dollars. Their program used a variety of methods over the years, including the old-fashioned pray the gay away, which doesn't work. I've tried it. I got a lot of gay. Pseudo-counseling, which our friends who are here who earlier said they're psychiatrists and the psychology student will not recognize as counseling because it isn't. Same-sex retreats, which seem counterproductive at best. I might sign up. And language counseling, in which, I kid you not, congregants are taught to call each other dude and bro as part of their therapy. We also have to keep in mind that these are highly religious people who very much believe that there is a God who doesn't love them, and that the only way they'll be able to go to heaven with the rest of their family and friends is if they become heterosexual and stop the sin. The Bible gives you plenty of evidence that this God doesn't like the gays. This is just a few of them. A couple in the Old Testament. Some Christians will tell you, yeah, but Jesus. Well, there's stuff in the New Testament as well. I won't preach them at you. You can look them up yourself. As I told you earlier, the founders were a few guys, but they were primarily Michael Bussey and Gary Cooper back in 1976. They were the very faces of Exodus International at the beginning. And they traveled across the country and they spread the word that there's hope, that you can be saved from your homosexuality. And to save money, because they were at first a fledgling group, they would stay in the same hotel room together, and they would stay up long nights chatting with each other, and they became very close. In fact, so close that 3 years later, here they are at their commitment ceremony. Yay! After which they then quit the group and began denouncing it. Unfortunately, Mr. Cooper has passed away since then, but Michael Bussey is still very much alive, and he does his best to fight against the very monster that he created. He was interviewed just a few years ago when he was asked a very pointed question, how many people did you see change? He said none, not one. He said, I did see people, however, become less and less interested in sex. Abstinence, however long-lived, is not the same thing as changing your sexual orientation. So they needed new leadership, and they eventually found it in the face of this guy, John Polk, who has a very interesting background I won't go into, but he was a very sad man for a long time. And he eventually was elected as chairman of the board of Exodus International North America, and his reign seemed promising at first. In fact, he was very successful at promoting the group. Here's a cover story from Newsweek magazine back in 1998 with him and his ex-lesbian wife. Unfortunately for him, on September 19th of 2000, while on a speaking tour, Polk was spotted at Mr. P's, which is a popular gay bar in Washington, D.C., apparently chatting up the bartender and a few of the other patrons. Someone recognized him and called some members of the activist group, the Human Rights Campaign, who then rushed down to the bar with a disposable camera. This was pre-iPhone. So they only had 3 shots on it. So they ran in, accidentally took a picture of their own shoe. Then they ran over and saw Polk, and they said, you can't take pictures in here, it's a bar. So he went running out the door, and this is the only photo they managed to get of him. He then told the board of Exodus that he didn't know it was a gay bar. Then later he said he went in to look for directions, and then they fired him. So they needed new leadership yet again. These are the best and brightest, and they can't seem to remain into the ladies. They soon found Alan Chambers. Alan Chambers would actually be their last president in some ways. He's an ex-gay, married to an ex-lesbian again, and a few years ago, Chambers appeared on Lisa Ling's program, Our America, along with his wife, Leslie, and Ling asked him some very difficult questions that he said he needed time to think about. Interestingly, a few months later, he asked her to come back because he said he had an important announcement. That announcement was that he would be shutting down Exodus International after over 40 years of operation. So here is a little video clip. Yeah, good, yeah. Maybe. We'll see. Here is Lisa Ling asking him one of the questions, and then a second question that I want you to pay close attention to his answer to.
So what motivated the decision to stop reparative therapy?
The vast majority of people that I've met would say that there is some level of struggle or temptation or attraction that's resident there, whether it's a little or a lot. And I don't know whether someone can say that therapy changes that. You know, as I began to see and hear things that really disturbed and troubled me, I began to really share honestly within the membership of Exodus, hey, this is what I see going on. About 7 months ago, I was very, very clear with our leadership in saying, we're going to have to move away from this type of therapy because I just don't think that we can refer people to something that could be detrimental to them.
Alan, you've been married to Leslie for how many years?
Almost 15.
Almost 15, and you have 2 beautiful children. Mm-hmm. Would you say you're heterosexual?
I have to be honest and say, of course I have temptations. Of course I have attractions related to the same sex. But for over 15 years since I've been in relationship with Leslie, my attraction has been towards her. My devotion has been towards her. Someone asked me the other day, are you stuck in this marriage? I'm not stuck in a marriage. I chose this marriage. She is the object of my desire. She is the object of my affection. I wouldn't choose anything or anyone else but her. And so am I heterosexual? I don't know.
I do. Oh, Alan. Okay, whatever. I mean, he can be married to anybody he wants to. But this, again, this is the best and brightest, right? I mean, if you need me to tell you that this sort of thing doesn't change your sexual orientation, I don't really have time. These are the people who are running the organization. They should be the gold star level. And yet, it takes him, how long was that? Like 45 seconds to answer that question. If I asked you that question, probably you'd answer it that quick, yes or no, right? Amazing, yeah. So I'm glad you all applauded when I said Exodus shut down, but as I said, I think it might be a little premature. Yes, Alan Chambers later said that, we're shutting down. Well, frankly, I don't trust these people. So I kept checking their website. And what I saw was it suddenly changed into this new thing called Speak Love, which was kind of a placeholder. They were saying, we're not really sure where we're going to be now, so stay tuned. So I stayed tuned. So then I checked again, and I found this, which is, hey, buy my book. Hey, hire me to come give a talk. And they really seem to become a recloseting organization. They seem to recognize, this is my take on it, that they can't change your sexual orientation, but they can help you stay married to an opposite-sex partner, have children, and fit in. That's not exactly the same thing as shutting down. This may interest you as well. I kept checking, and one day I checked their website, and somebody forgot to pay the rent on the URL, and it said it was for sale. So I bought it. So now if you go to ExodusInternationalNorthAmerica.org, you see me giving this talk. Yeah. Okay, and that's a much longer talk, and you can go there and watch that or go to my website and download this whole thing, videos and all, and give the talk yourself. All right, on to NARTH. NARTH in some ways upsets me more because, as George said, I'm a professor of psychology, and these are not religious zealots. These are people who should know better. These are actually trained psychotherapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, and MFTs. So NARTH, as I said, is the National Association for Research and Therapy of Homosexuality. And NARTH really got its start back in, it didn't start in 1973, but the springboard for this was a decision made in 1973 by this man, Dr. Robert Spitzer of Columbia University, who's a psychiatrist. He was at the time the chair of the task force of the third edition of the DSM, the Bible of Psychotherapy. And up until that time, the DSM had always considered homosexuality a psychological disorder. So in 1973, Spitzer ruled against inclusion of homosexuality for the first time. This was a really big deal. This sent shockwaves through the psychological community. And he didn't do this just based on his own opinion. He had actually spoken to many activists from some gay groups. He also had taken a look at work like that by the famous psychologist Evelyn Hooker, who had looked at her gay friends and found that they were indistinguishable psychologically from a group of heterosexual men. And that was really surprising to psychologists. So homosexuality was deleted from the list of mental disorders for the first time. And as I said, it started a firestorm of controversy. You can imagine our disappointment when in 2000, the same Dr. Robert Spitzer published this article in the Archives of Sexual Behavior, claiming that he found a handful of gay men and women who had succeeded in changing their sexual orientation. This was a very hurtful article. It's one that he later apologized for and asked for a retraction. He said that he had made a huge mistake, and it would be an obvious one to you probably. He used self-report to determine whether or not the therapy had worked. He just said, you feel like a straight person now? Basically. And they said, yeah, I think I do. And these are highly motivated people who went through a program, so he apologized to his credit. He sadly passed away shortly thereafter. But of course, the retraction and an apology are never shown on the NARTH website, but this article certainly is found there. So this group was started by a guy named Joseph Nicolosi and a number of others in 1992 down in Encino, California. And again, this group is made up of people who should know better. They use 11 features, kind of an 11-step group. They include silly things like participating in sports and don't go to those gay plays and things. Go to church, marry a woman, have some kids, you know, that sort of thing. I mean, it'd be ridiculous if it weren't so hurtful and harmful. So let's take a look at someone who very much follows these rules. This character here, Richard Cohn, who's the founder and president of the International Healing Foundation. He also has a very interesting background. He is a popularizer of two therapies, pseudotherapies, called holding therapy and bioenergetics. Cohn was raised in a home with an abusive father, but his parents were actually very accepting of his homosexuality. But he struggled with it and found hope in the Moonies, the Unification Church of the Reverend Sun Myung Moon, after which he later joined the Wesleyan Healing Community, which I know very well, look up my past, sorry, in the 1980s, and he gave up his so-called homosexual lifestyle and got married to a woman. It was an arranged marriage by Moon, and he now has 5 children. He believes he was healed of his homosexuality through therapy and Jesus' love. So he's the author of 4 books. I swear, you guys should give me some award for reading this shit. It's just terrible. Gay children, straight parents, coming out straight, and the one that bothers me the most is a children's book called Alfie's Home, during which you learn that your homosexuality is caused by a number of things, including an overbearing mother, a distant father, and being molested by your uncle. Yeah, so this is what Cohn believes. I want you to meet Cohn in his own words, so take a look at this.
Simple science demonstrates that opposites attract. If you have a positive charge and a negative charge, I have actually magnets in the garage. They look, we have a south really and a north. And a north and a south, what's going to happen?
Opposites attract.
They love each other. They love it, baby. They love it. Okay, let's flip this around. We got 2 north and 2 south. What's going to happen?
Repel.
Wah, 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 wah. You know that. They just can't do it. Okay, so why is a guy attracted to a guy? If opposites attract, it means he doesn't feel his guyness. He's looking to complete himself. If he felt masculine, he would say, ooh, hooking up with a guy? It's a non-sequential.
Non-sexual, it establishes like parent-child relationship. So he didn't experience this growing up with his dad.
Rob, do you feel a sexual connection right now?
No, I don't. I feel very safe and very comforted, and it just feels wonderful.
Another technique, bioenergetics, designed to help clients release memories stored in the muscles, in this case by hitting a pillow with a tennis racket.
I was angry at my mother, so I started saying, Mom! 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 Why did you do that to me?
Okay. I took a few practicum classes. There were no tennis rackets. I don't remember any of that. So yeah, Richard Cohn is a bit of a joke in my opinion. He was on TV numerous times before his great downfall, including the Paula Zahn interview you just saw, a mocking piece on The Daily Show, and a pathetic on-air battle with Rachel Maddow. You should have thought that through. It's resulted in numerous ex-gay organizations quickly distancing themselves from him, including PFOX, which he began. Parents and Friends of Ex-Gays, he calls it, which is a play on PFLAG, of course. He is no longer a licensed therapist. So how does he make money? He operates his group as a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you want his therapy, you make a donation, which is tax deductible, and then he'll help you beat a tennis racket. He's been banned for life from the American Psychological Association and the American Counseling Association for a number of ethical violations. So yeah, that's just one wacky version. Some not so wacky versions include things like aversion therapy, which can actually be quite dangerous. If you're familiar with Pavlovian techniques, you know, when you associate one thing with another, if the first thing is bad, then the next thing becomes bad, right? So this is the same idea. You may be familiar that some of the treatment programs for drugs and alcohol used to use this stuff called antabuse, which has no effect on you whatsoever unless you drink alcohol, in which case the chemicals combine and it makes you more violently physically ill than you've ever been. I mean, people projectile vomit on this stuff. It's just terrible. And it lasts as long as the two chemicals are in your bloodstream. So playing upon that idea, some of these gay conversion therapists will then use ipecac, which is used in hospitals and poison control centers to make you vomit up anything that you've eaten that may be harmful to you. So these programs are quite intense. They give you the ipecac while you're looking at homosexual pornography, or sometimes just two men hugging each other or shaking hands or something like that, anything that's male to male. And they will last for about 6 hours. So they keep giving you this stuff, and you keep vomiting and vomiting. And they take place in 3 to 4 day programs, which you then pay for. So of course, it has no effect whatsoever, but it looks very similar to some much more dangerous techniques, including the one that this young man went through. I'm interviewing some of these folks for a book that I'm writing, and Sam Brenton is one of the few that allows me to use his likeness and his name. Many of these folks carry a lot of shame, as you can imagine. Sam tells his story. He says that he was raised in a very religious home. His parents were itinerant preachers, and so they traveled around in communities that were very like-minded, and one day, he told his parents everything, and he said one day a young boy brought a Playboy magazine into this group of young boys, and he told his parents, I looked at it too, I'm going to be honest, but I didn't feel anything when I looked at it. And he felt like he was really righteous and holy that he didn't feel anything. And his parents said, oh, okay. And he said, but to be honest, sometimes I do feel those things when I look at my friend Dale. Dale was a boy. So this began a cycle of abuse, physical and mental abuse at the hands of his father, which included, quote, falling down the stairs a lot. They would take him to a physician who was part of their church community, and no questions were asked. Eventually, this escalated to taking him to a conversion therapist. This conversion therapist began by telling him, you have AIDS, you're going to die. All the other gay people have died already, and we're going to try to save you. So he was terrified. He was a teenager, you know. And so he said, we're going to start with some prayer and counseling. That then escalated to putting ice blocks on his hands for hours at a time while he looked at same-sex images. In this case, it wasn't even pornography. It was just men hugging each other or touching each other. And then they would remove them if it was a man and woman together. You get the idea. The ice blocks lasted for a few days. Then they wrapped wire coils around his hands and attached it to a car battery. And each time they showed male-female, nothing would happen. If it was male-male contact, they would electrocute his hands. This didn't work. So at the end of the program, a few weeks later, they began inserting needles under his fingernails, then attached to a car battery. Now, Sam has since then left that particular community and even reconciled with his parents, which is quite telling, I think, because I'm not sure I would have that kind of forgiveness in me. And he's still a Christian. He's doing quite well. He just graduated from MIT with a degree in nuclear engineering, speaks 5 languages, and is in a relationship with another man. So he's doing well, but he does still have suicidal tendencies. So all his friends have to have suicide hotlines nearby. He said that whenever he hugs someone, about half the time, if it's a man and they hug, he still feels the pain, like it comes back to him. So he said, I do this mental trick where I convince myself I'm hugging him. Because if I hug him, I'm causing the pain, he's not. Because I'm afraid that if I don't do that, eventually I won't be able to touch anyone at all. In some ways, Sam got off lucky. This young man didn't. His name was Raymond Byes. His parents suspected he was gay because they thought he was too effeminate, so they sent him off to a camp to toughen him up. It turned out to be a gay conversion camp. It was called Echo Wild Game Rangers Camp in South Africa. He was only 15 years old. 2.5 months later, this was what was returned to his parents. Hospital staff described Byes as severely malnourished, dehydrated. His arm had been broken in 2 places. There were burns and wounds all over his body. He lay in intensive care for 4 weeks until he died. His roommate reported later on that for some reason Raymond was chosen for particular abuse. He was chained to his bed for much of the time that he was there. He was beaten, left in his own filth. He was forced to eat his own feces. They put a pillowcase over his head at night and shocked him with electric cattle prods. A later investigation uncovered that 2 other boys had died at the camp in 2007, and those cases had been deemed heart attacks. They were 18 and 19 years old. So they exhumed the bodies in the investigation, and the people running the camp went to jail. That's good. Back here at home, yeah, they should rot. Back here at home, we do have some hope. We do have some states that have bans. 2 not shown on this map here are Nevada and Connecticut. We have 8 states so far. Unfortunately, these bans don't really go far enough. If you look at the underlined section there, it clearly says that these bans only apply to licensed professionals and only for those under the age of 18. So if you're under 18, a preacher, minister, rabbi, whatever, can still do this stuff to you. There's no law against it. And if you're over the age of 18, even someone under the auspices of the American Psychological Association could still do some of this stuff to you. So we do need to go a bit further, especially since there are so many gays and lesbians still living in states where there's no ban whatsoever. This is especially important to me since right now we do have a vice president who has a deplorable record on the treatment and regard of LGBT people. Pence said during his run-up to the 2000 re-election campaign when he was running for governor, he said resources should be directed toward those institutions which provide assistance to those seeking to change their sexual behavior. He was talking about funds that should have gone to HIV/AIDS prevention. And he wanted instead, apparently, to put them into gay conversion therapy. His people say that's not what he meant. Okay, sure. So what should you do about it, you may be wondering? Well, one of the things that you should do, you've already done. You listened to someone talk about this, so now you're aware of it. I think Gloria Steinem once said, the truth will set you free, but first it's going to piss you off. And hopefully you're a little pissed off. The other thing you can do is support this wonderful organization, PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. It's a very large, probably the largest gay and lesbian and trans support group in the world. It was founded in 1972 by a mother who was very proud of her openly gay son. So check out pflag.org. If you live in my home state of California, you can throw a rock and hit a PFLAG group, and that's wonderful. In some of these other states, however, you might not be so lucky. So another thing that you can do is to start a PFLAG group or find out where your local PFLAG group is and support them. Someone asked me when I gave this talk in San Francisco, what does PFLAG have to do with it? So maybe I should explain that. Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. The clue is in the title. So who's taking these people to the gay conversion therapist? Parents. Who's not standing up for them? Friends. Who's the victims? Lesbians and gays. PFLAG. If you want to hear more of my ramblings, there's a few places you can do that. Thank you for your kind attention.